All right. Thank you guys so much for coming to our webinar on implementing the new history and social science standards for grades 6 through 8. Let's just get with some items, do some items of business to begin with. First, when you guys logged in, you should choose call in with a computer to enable your sound. When you select this, it should highlight that green button at the bottom that says connect audio and video. You'll want to double check your volume on your computer. The next thing you'll also want to do is select the chat box, which I've highlighted here with a circle at the bottom. This will enable us to talk and have a conversation throughout the webinar. You also want to make sure to select from the drop-down menu all participants. If you could please mute any microphones or cell phones if you're calling in, that would be great. Just to check as well, I see someone that said hello. Are you guys hearing me okay for so far? If you can type that in the chat box, I'd appreciate it. Wonderful, thank you. All right, so let's move on. So here's a little bit about me. My name is Linda Burrows, and I am the new K12 Social Studies and World Language Specialist here at ADE. I've taught for over 20 years in public schools, grades 7 through 12. So, and I've taught every single subject in that range too, as far as social studies classes go. I also worked on the standards committee for 2 years, helping to write the new standards. And that's probably the most recent picture. I don't have one of me, but that's of me and my family. We were taking our son on his senior trip since he just graduated high school and is now a freshman at ASU, and then my daughter's a junior at U of A. And so we did like a national park tour. So that's a little bit about me. This is actually since I'm new, I did just quit teaching this past June actually, and started working for ADE. So this is really my second webinar. Hopefully this one won't have the technical difficulties. We had some Wi-Fi issues last time. If for some reason you get kicked off of the webinar, just go ahead and navigate back into WebEx with that link that was sent to you guys, and you can log back in and join back up with the meeting, just in case something happens. So let's have you guys introduce yourselves if you could. So in the chat box, I'd like for you guys to say what your current position is, where you teach, what grade do you teach, and then I want you to just kind of, from a scale of 1 to 4, judge yourself right now about how familiar are you with the new standards. Give yourself a 1 if you feel like you're really familiar with them and you know them really well, a 2 that you're somewhat comfortable with them, a 3 you know them a little bit and you've looked at them, or 4 I just haven't had the time to look at them at all. So if you can take a minute and in the chat box, because it should be for all participants, that way you can see what everybody is, who they are. Perfect. So we've got some teachers, some curriculum specialists. It looks like people are somewhat familiar with them, or maybe just a little bit familiar with them. That's good. 8th grade social studies is fantastic. Wonderful. Oh, it's not showing the other attendees. Okay, that's good to know. Let me see if I can change that real quick here. Let's Let me see real quick here if this will fix it. Let's see. Hmm. Oh, let's see. That's the attendees list. Whoops. so it doesn't show everybody. Let's see. Let's see this. Curriculum specialist, eighth grade teacher. Um, let's just try this. All right. Well, I'll narrate if this ends up not working out. I don't want to waste too much time with it. So we've got a lot of middle school, junior high social studies teachers. Um, Looks like most everybody somewhere between a 2 and a 3. Um, so that's great. So hopefully we'll get you a little bit more in depth with how you guys feel about the standards and then using them in your classes. All right. So our agenda for today's webinar is to really look in depth with the new standards. And I want you to be able to understand some of the shifts and changes that took place with the new standards. Inquiry being such a big part of the new standards, I want to go over that and what that exactly means in your classrooms. And then go over what is kind of the expectation from the Department of Education as far as the implementation and the use of the new standards. And then last, because I always felt that this was hugely important, is I wanted to have things I could take away from any kind of professional development. So I want to leave you guys with resources that you can use in your classrooms. And then lastly, open it up to any questions that you may have. So when we look at the new standards, we need to kind of figure out what they exactly are because they do look so different from the old standards. So the first main change with the standards is that they really do have a focus on inquiry and questioning for the students. They are extraordinarily broad, and this does allow for a lot of flexibility, especially at a local level in your districts and even in your schools. It's not like the old POs in that way. And so that does leave you for that flexibility, but it also, in some ways, I found that teachers are not having a lot of direction. That does leave them kind of like, well, what do I exactly teach in my classroom? So hopefully this will help a little bit today. The standards for the first time since I've been teaching actually show a real strong progression of both skills and topics from K12, but specifically the 6-8 grade band that we're going to be focusing on today. Now, what the standards are not, they are not a checklist of items that students must memorize. So it's not about that rote memorization anymore. They are not inflexible. There are so many different ways that you can use these standards to teach social studies class for 6th, 7th, and 8th grades. And last, they're not a standalone. They are not meant to be used just as a siloed thing. They're meant to be used in many different ways. They're meant to be integrated with the ELA standards. And the nice thing with them is that they, too, with that flexibility, it does allow you to bring in some science, bring in some ELA, especially for those of you that are more of a middle school model where you have teams. This is a great opportunity where you don't have to teach social studies in a chronological way. You can do it thematically and bring in art and foreign language, whatever it may be. So the 2018 social studies standards look a little bit different. And the biggest part are what we call the course considerations, or at the elementary level, they're called storylines. And there are different components to these standards. So this is the first one. So the course considerations and the storylines are the main topics, the themes that you would want to make sure that you include in a 6th, 7th, or 8th grade class. It also has the disciplinary skills and processes. This these content standards are actually our inquiry arc. So this gets into that inquiry component that we really focus and emphasize on. You also have civics content standards, economics content standards, geography content standards, and history content standards. And so this is another way in which standards are a little bit different from before is if you're teaching a history class, you're not just teaching history. You are actually teaching some geography standards. You're teaching some economic standards. You're teaching some civic standards, and you're teaching some inquiry standards. So there's a little bit of everything in all of these course considerations, or in a social studies course that wasn't really there with the previous standards. So just real quick, even though I know we're focusing on 6-8 here, but this shows the progression of the storylines in a K-8 setting. And it starts with the idea of kindergartners being small, who they are as citizens, to understanding then as they are a part of a community, getting to know the world around them, and then shifting to Arizona studies in third grade, and then the Americas in fourth grade. Again, each time building progressively to a bigger and bigger world view. So after the regions of the Americas, then gets into the United States studies in fifth grade, which then brings us to sixth, seventh, and eighth. And this is one of the things that I was really excited about with the new standards, especially from a middle school point of view, is having taught seventh and eighth grade social studies for 4 years, is getting that idea of a worldview and global studies into that grade band of six, seven, and eight is huge. It also lends itself very nicely to the progression, and it makes the eighth grade year, which I think is fantastic, as almost like a capstone year where you take everything you've learned and now you're going to apply it to, get kids motivated and excited about schools. So let's look at the course considerations or the storylines for the specific sixth, seventh, and eighth grades. So here's the sixth grade storylines. And again, we've broadened our scope, so now we're including a worldview. Sixth grade is a global studies course, and it emphasizes from really early on in early history, and it focuses also on the Eastern Hemisphere. So we're not so Eurocentric, and we again broaden that worldview and make things wider for kids. You can see at the top of up here in this area, this is just the content focus. It talks about the Eastern Hemisphere, including the Middle East, North Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, a little bit of Europe, and then Asia and Oceania. And then here, these bullets here are essentially what we're calling the storylines or the course considerations. And in this case, this is not a checklist that I want you guys to think of, but it's more like the topic. So you can use it that, for example, this early river civilizations where it says such as Mesopotamia, the Nile River, Indus River Valley, or Yellow River Valley. It doesn't mean you have to teach all four of those river valleys. You can focus on one, like Mesopotamia, as a case study and get in depth with it, and that's perfectly fine. So this is kind of, think of the early river civilizations would be the topic, and then these are some examples that you may choose to teach or not teach. I would say the only exception at a sixth grade level would be to include all the world religions and belief systems, just to get as many as you can, just because it is something that is pretty misunderstood. So then let's look at the seventh grade integrated global studies. So this is a bit different as well because seventh grade has had a lot of U.S. focus, and seventh grade is not a U.S. history course. It's a global studies course that introduces U.S. history. And so what that means is that you're teaching global studies, and you can do that through the lens of United States history. So you're going to start early with the influence of the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment. So you could talk about those as ideals of the American Revolution, but then how did then the American Revolution influence maybe the French Revolution or the Russian Revolution, or look at it in comparison to the Cultural Revolution in the 60s with China. So again, it's a real comparative study, and it is a global study. It's not just a U.S. history course. Again, you've got the broad bullets here, which are just the topics. It doesn't mean like for global conflicts and their consequences, you have to do every single one of these, but it just means you need to focus on global conflicts and their consequences. The kind of such as are the extra things to give people that maybe need a little bit more guidance, that kind of guidance, but the main idea of the bullets is what you want to focus on for your content. And then last, let's look at the citizenship and engagement in today's society. So having taught junior high, and you guys all understand this being, middle school, junior high teachers, is that, these kids are squirrely. It's such a fun age to teach. And the best way to do this, I think, is to kind of harness all that crazy middle school hormonal power for something that's good and positive. And this is where the eighth grade curriculum is fantastic because kids get excited and interested about ideas like immigration and about human rights and environmental issues, and they're interested in these topics. So you teach the foundations of the United States government, you talk about the constitutions and institutions, but then get into current legislation and civil rights movement, and you really get those kids involved in being civically engaged in their societies. There's also a standard talking about media literacy, which I think is extraordinarily important for these kids that are consuming so much information to understand sourcing, where they're getting their information, what the validity of their information is. And I think that's an important piece of this eighth grade curriculum that's in here. And the idea, too, is that there's actually some research behind this that shows if you can get students engaged in their communities and that civic engagement prior to high school, these kids will tend to be more of regular voters when they're adults. They'll be more involved in community engagement and actions. They'll volunteer more as they get older. And so this citizenship and this idea of taking a topic maybe, and so that they've learned these things through sixth, seventh, and then applying them in eighth grade, like environmental issues when we talk about, what's the rising sea level going to do and how is that going to create those global conflicts that maybe they talked about in seventh grade? How might that make that worse, or how is that a consequence of that? Or when you talk about, issues in the Eastern Hemisphere or Oceania, all those small little islands that are, have a chance of disappearing, and that culture and that language and history that might go with it because of rising sea levels. Those are ideas and ways that you can get those kids involved and also get them involved locally too. So those are our course considerations for sixth, seventh, and eighth grade. Eighth grade. So real quick, now that we've gone over those three, I'd like to just kind of get a poll from you guys and just see what are some of the concerns that you guys have with these new storylines or course considerations. So if you can type that into the chat box, I will narrate it if we can't see it. When you see the amount of standards to teach or those topics and themes, are you guys feeling that there is too much to do? Are you feeling that there's flexibility? Do you feel like there's not enough guidance? Textbooks is a really good concern. How do you deal with textbooks and this kind of stuff, especially if you're talking about very present day kinds of things with regards to, like eighth grade and civic engagement? Resources. Yeah, resources definitely seems to be a big part of the concerns that you guys have, which hopefully I can help you guys out with that a little bit today. Any other concerns besides textbooks or resources that you guys are having at this point in time? Nope. All right, let's move on then. Perfect. So let's look a little bit more at the now let's look at the specific at the anchor standards. So the anchor standards, and this is the idea that you have to remember, is that these are the skills that we want students to grasp and master by the time they graduate from high school. So we don't expect them to necessarily have them completely mastered by the time they leave you guys in sixth, seventh, and eighth grade. And so just keep that in mind. But this is like the overall, this is our end goal, that everybody that is involved in these kids' education, that we want to have them get to this point. So we have 5 core content areas with regards to these anchor standards. The first are the disciplinary skills and processes, and you see those labeled as the SPs for skills and processes. And there are 4 of those, and this is the inquiry arc. And this deals with things like chronological thinking, comparison, cause and effect, change over time, multiple perspectives, which is a great thing, especially in like that sixth and seventh grade content with the more of a worldview global studies you guys can get into very easily. And then it also gets into the idea of claim and reasoning. We have then the four anchor content anchor standards, which get into civics, economics, geography, history. Everybody has four except for economics here. Economics does have a fifth core kind of anchor standard, and that's this idea of being financially literate and kids understanding income and spending and investment. The state legislature actually just passed a law last year that required that financial literacy be in the standards. We knew it was coming, so we wanted to make sure to add this in there already. And it is something that I have found, especially having taught economics at a high school level, that a lot of parents do not talk to their kids about finances and about money and just the idea of spending and saving, almost like it's a taboo kind of subject. Um, I mean, I've had to teach seniors in high school how to write and fill out a check because they don't know how to do it. So, this is something that's really important that now we're kind of making it the responsibility of everybody, all the teachers, to kind of add some economics. And while that can be a little intimidating, especially if you've never had an economics class, let me just reassure you there are some fantastic free resources that have lessons out there that I'll show you that can take you step by step. They're hands on, student centered learning, and they're actually a lot of fun too. So those are good in there. Let's see. So those are the anchor standards. And then once we get through the anchor standards, then each of these below, these five content areas, have grade level specific standards. And you don't necessarily hit all 21 standards every single year, with the exception of maybe, especially in sixth, seventh, and eighth, we get to more of the disciplinary skills and processes, kids' ability to think and make a claim and back up that claim with evidence is developed enough by that age that they can do that. But you will have in a seventh grade class, you'll have just some civics, some economics, some history, and some geography standards. You won't necessarily have all of them or be responsible for all of them. That was one of the critiques of the old standards, that it was so much that you had to do in that checklist of POs that there was no way you could ever get through it all. And so it was that idea of a mile wide but an inch deep. And now splitting those standards across the grade band allows us to get much deeper and to hit things repeatedly so that way kids can get through them more and more. All right, so when you look at the anchor standards and then looking at the content standards, which we haven't really gone into, we're going to do a little activity with it. What do you guys think is the most notable feature of the new standards? If you can type that into the chat for me. Definitely the flexibility is what some of you guys are mentioning. So that is something that I've noticed too with the standards is you can teach them chronologically like we have in the past, and a lot of people feel very uh, comfortable with that. But it does allow you to have that kind of interconnectedness, the inquiry. Uh, and they are very similar to the ELA standards. In fact, especially for those of you that are teaching sixth grade and teaching it as a self-contained class, we've actually created a crosswalk where some teachers have been told, oh, you can't teach social studies because you have to be teaching ELA. And so this is where you can tie those things together and say, oh, I actually am teaching ELA by teaching these social studies standards. Inquiry is definitely a huge, I think, notable feature of the standards and a very different way to look at it from where we have before. All right, I'm going to go ahead and go on. Time is flying. So some of the shifts to just review real quick about the standards, and you guys notice some of them, is this idea of inquiry-based learning and critical thinking. The progression of the idea that focuses from an individual to a community, to the state, to the nation, to the world, and builds upon that for you guys. The grade level anchor standards, and then lastly, the skill complexity builds. So while we do ask middle school kids to, think critically and do inquiry, it's going to be at a different level than, say, a high school kid would do. And that's going to be at a higher level than, say, we would ask a fourth grader to do. And then some of the other standards that especially impact you guys at 6th, 7th grade, and 8th grade are U.S. and world history standards are now combined into one strand. Whether you teach history, world history, or a U.S. history, history is taught in that exact same way. The pedagogy is the same. Personal finance is K12, and then these don't necessarily apply to you guys, but just so you know, Arizona Studies moved to 4th grade, or from 4th to 3rd, and then colonial content moved from 5th to 4th grade. So let's talk a little bit more about this grade band. So like I mentioned before, Global Studies is the 6th grade. It's focused on the Eastern Hemisphere with Africa, the Middle East, South Asia, the Pacific Islands. You have some European history, but not a lot. And then we move into 7th grade, which is the integrated global studies with U.S. history. Again, you're not just teaching U.S. history, but you're expanding that content, prepping those kids to think beyond. And then the last piece of the grade band is like that capstone, as I like to call it, where you're getting kids engaged in citizenship and civic engagement, focusing on using civics and economics to make those connections between the history that they learned for the past, 3-4 years to current stuff of what's going on today. So 6th grade global studies, here again are the main topics of the course considerations. So you do need to teach these bulleted lists, but all the extra things after it are really that's for you and your local district to focus on. The disciplinary skills and processes at a 6th grade level deal with chronological reasoning, multiple perspectives, inquiry, and cause and effect. The civic standards in a 6th grade talk about individual rights, roles, responsibilities, process, rules, and laws. It also does have economics, market systems, and a global economy and financial literacy in there. So you can talk about spending and saving and how that may impact different things that happened over history and time. You have geography standards that deal with human-environment interactions, population migration, global interconnectedness, and using geographical representations. And then we have history standards talking about the development of civilizations, cycles of conflict, institutions, economic, political, religious, and then patterns of interactions. And this is where you'll be amazed when you're teaching something. Maybe you're teaching something on an institution and you're talking about the economics of it. You're actually kind of killing many birds with one stone as far as that goes with your standards. Global Studies Integrated U.S. is 1600s to the present. So that is here are your course considerations. Again, it's a world history, it's a global studies course, but maybe taught through a U.S. lens. So you're not just talking about the United States in World War I, you're talking about it in a much broader perspective. The disciplinary skills and processes are the same as in 6th grade. Again, just kind of building on that, practicing those skills over and over again to get those kids to a really good positive place. The civic standards are very similar with individuals' rights, roles, and responsibilities, process, rules, and laws. Economics, in this case, you're going to talk about economic reasoning, market systems in the global economy, so you'll be building on those 6th grade skills. You'll also have the geography skills built again, talking about human-environment interactions, human population, and global interconnectedness. And then lastly, the history standards deal with developments of civilizations, cycles of conflict. Here we have the institutions are the same and the patterns of interactions are the same as in 6th grade. Citizenship and civic engagement for 8th grade, the course considerations, this looks like it's a typical government class or civics class, but it's not. and it's that civic engagement part that is very, very different. So you're not going to take an entire year to teach just U.S. government. You're going to talk about those foundations and the Constitution, and you are going to talk about the Supreme, some landmark Supreme Court cases, but then you're getting into issues, things like social movements, human rights, environmental issues, information media literacy. These are the things that really get kids uh, uh, interested, and then they will be able to use that and for hopefully for good, right? The disciplinary skills and processes are the same, again, building upon those sixth and seventh grade skills. Civics is, again, it's a little bit more heavy in the eighth grade course. So you've got civic virtues and democratic principles. Civic and political institutions is new, and also the process, rules, and laws. Economics, you've got the domestic economy, which is a new one added to the standards from sixth and seventh grade. Geography standards are pretty similar. And then the history standards are not as much. You're talking about cycles of conflict and then those institutions, economic, political, and religious. And yes, this PowerPoint will be available to you guys after we get done with the webinar and I check off attendance for you guys. All right, so I asked you guys to print off the one pager from your from the state website. And so I'd like to do, I just want to take like 5 minutes. We're going to do this really quick, but what I'd like you to do is just select one bullet from those course considerations or storylines. And then in 5 minutes, go through the rest of them and see how many of those standards, and again, thinking broadly and flexible, how many of those standards can you attribute to that particular course consideration or bullet. So for example, one of the seventh grade storylines talks about political revolution. So if you're teaching seventh grade, look at that and then see, okay, how many of all of those standards can you apply to that one bullet? So I'm going to give you guys 5 minutes to just kind of look through your standards. As you're doing this, go ahead and type it into the chat box so I can see it and I will narrate for you guys. As you guys are looking through your one pagers, remember to think broadly. How can you apply geography to something like the Cold War? Or how are geography standards maybe used for, can you use them for things like immigration or whatever bullet point you had? So think kind of outside the box and think broadly. So as you guys are adding up your numbers, we'll just do like 2 more minutes here. Go ahead, type them into the chat box, and we'll see. I think if you select where it says all panelists, I think that's how you're able to see everybody else's message if you select that too. So someone just posted that they've already got 10 standards for one bullet. That's fantastic. All right, let's go ahead and just move on. So let me have you put, just add up how many you've got right now, and we'll just stop and type that number into the chat box. That'd be good. We've got 8. You've got at least one standard. 6, 5. That's fantastic. Revolutions, definitely 10. Perfect. Human rights, at least 10. Wonderful. Yeah. It's definitely, I did in-person training on the civil rights movement and teaching education, economics using the civil rights movement. And I was amazed. I could hit 12 of the new standards with one single lesson. And so it definitely, you have that option and that flexibility with it. All right, here's an example. So here's 7th grade. There's our bullet. And then here are some of the skills and processes standards that I could count. Here were, and I just copied, cut, and paste because I couldn't fit them all on the page. But here I got, let's see, talking about the American Revolution, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 civic standards, 2 economic standards, talking about like the economic issues of the benefits for, were you a Tory or were you a patriot? What are the economic decisions that people had to think about with regard to the revolution? And then obviously like the maps and the geographic representations, you can talk about the cultural demography of, what does it now mean to be an American when you've got a third people wanted to stay, a third with the British, a third wanted to leave, and then a third were undecided. So how do you define yourselves as Americans? That would get into that like cultural demography and stuff. Good, excellent. All right, so what I have for you now, just because inquiry is such a big part of it, I do want to share, and we're only going to watch a few minutes of this video. And so if you can't see the video, just, again, type and let me know in the Q&A. But this is a video from the Georgia Department of Ed, and it shows what inquiry looks like in a classroom. Okay, so we're just going to watch that one little piece of it here. Let's see. Whoops. All right. So looking at inquiry, and that shows you real inquiry in action. And the thing that I like most about the inquiry is the fact that it does hit multiple standards over time. And you do this by exploring the standards. It's all about developing questions. You're gathering resources, primary and secondary sources, and then you're asking those kids to come to conclusions and communicate those conclusions on their own with evidence that they're finding. It's nice as well because it is something where it's not like the old POs where you just, oh, okay, I taught that person, I taught that event, I can check it off and I'm done. This is something where you'll be hitting the standard over and over and over again, doing those repeated passes to get that really in-depth information. Because especially for us, you find, like for high school teachers, right? They'll hear kids, oh, well, we know you guys took US history. And the kids are like, well, I don't remember it at all, or we never learned that. And it's like, we know they actually did. But it's the fact that they learned those items in this kind of vacuum where it wasn't tied to anything. And so it kind of just floats in their brains and then floats right out. Inquiry and the fact that they're having to get some kind of buy-in and onus that they're making this claim and they're investigating that actually shows that kids build better background knowledge, and they actually tend then to do better on standardized testing, especially in reading and writing, having that background knowledge of social studies in there. So with regards to the timeline, because I do want to give you guys plenty of time to look at some, I want to go through and show you guys resources. So the timeline of where we're at right now, we're done with our awareness phase where the state board approved the standards and they've been out for everybody to look at. We're now in this transition year where you should be incorporating disciplinary skills and processes, getting that inquiry into your lessons as much as possible. You should be gathering resources and creating lessons that use the new standards, and then try to attend as many professional development opportunities like this one, for example, to learn about inquiry and content, especially if it's something that you're not super confident in, because it does take practice to do it. It's a much different way of teaching than I think I ever used to teach in the past. I feel like I prep a heck of a lot more and I teach less doing inquiry. It's also something too that you can get inquiry into your lessons in small little snippets of, say, an anticipatory set or maybe as an exit ticket, which I'll talk about when I show you guys some of the other things here. And then the last part of the timeline is the fact that the full implementation should be in the 2020-2021 school year. Obviously, especially if some schools maybe are, don't have like a real strong or big district community to help them out, and we recognize that there are some schools and stuff that may take a little bit longer to fully implement it, but you should be getting those standards implemented as much as you possibly can. There is no call for or social studies test that is on the horizon from the State Board of Education. So in that way, it's kind of a blessing and a curse, right? It's a blessing because it gives us the flexibility. We're not beholden to a test, but then that also means that, especially for some administration, they're like, oh, well, if there's not a test, we should ignore it and focus on reading and math. And there are actual studies, which you can always contact me later, that prove that that's actually a bad idea, as reading scores across the nation have plateaued. All right, so let's get to our resources and what you have, because I want you guys to have stuff to use in your classroom. So with inquiry focuses on both primary and secondary sources. So especially, I just want to review these to make sure that everybody's on the same page. So primary sources would be sources that were created at the time of the event or at the time of the person's life. A primary source can be anything from an art image that was printed or drawn or sewn at the time period. It could be a political cartoon of the era. It could be an interview, a letter, It could be an artifact like a building. It could be it could be a photograph, anything that's of that exact time period. And then your sources should be skill and age level appropriate. Um, but definitely, you still want to challenge your students' thinking. And then last, the secondary source would be something that would be written or created after the fact. This could be a map that was created much later. It could be some kind of biography written later. It could be a textbook written later, all of that kind of stuff. Yes, IDM is a great resource, which gets me to here are your resources. So these are just a few, and I've got many, many more for you. And when you guys get the PowerPoint, you'll get it in a PDF. So when you go and you click on here, like this is the inquiry design model, and it'll instantly take you to the inquiry design method. These are every year the Council for Social Studies works with notable social studies, and they put out a list of books that are great for students that are geared for different grade levels. You've got the National Endowment for the Humanities, the National Archives, the Library of Congress teaching with primary sources. For more current events, you've got things like Newsela. Brain Pop has got these great little videos, definitely, I would say 6th, maybe 7th grade, depending upon the video. ReadWorks is just like Newsela, but you don't need a subscription for it. PBS has great stuff. Teaching Tolerance has got fantastic lessons. And our very own Arizona Geographic Alliance has got really good lessons too. For the economics piece, because especially I know a lot of people didn't major in economics, and so that can be a very scary thing to learn. 2 places to go for great lessons on, getting some economics into it would be the Econ Ed link here and the Federal Reserve Education.org. These both have lessons that are geared towards all different kinds of topics and things like that that you can use in your classes for that. Other places to go, and if we have time, I'll show you some of these too, is the Arizona State web page. So this is where I told you guys to come. Whoops. Let's come back here. Oh, gosh, sorry. Let's see, this is where we've got like the grade levels at a glance. This is where you could print off your one pager. Instead of printing off the whole giant thing of the standards, we've kind of chunked it here. Under the implementation resources, if you click on these links here for 6th, 7th grade resources, there is takes you out to a PDF that has a list of all these different resources, how they are used, how they can apply to 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, and they are all free. Some of them ask you to require like that you set up an account. I have used almost all of these in my teaching over the years, and I've never been hassled or harassed for emails. And so that's a really good place to start. And so this kind of brings me to the whole textbook question. With the standards being so flexible, there really is not a need for a textbook to have in class. There are so many primary source documents. There are places like the Stanford History Education Group or SHEG that even have already scaffolded resources that you just have to print them out, and they've got questions developed already for you. For example, one of the classes I taught last year was a co-taught world history class at a high school level, which is pretty similar to some of the 6th and 7th grade topics that you guys would be teaching. And in that class I had, because it was co-taught, I had 12 special ed students, and of those 12, half of them had a reading level that was below a 4th grade reading level. So in doing this, I would get out and go to the SHEG website. They had resources that were out there that made it very easy to understand. They had vocabulary already defined with the kids, and when I partnered them with other stronger readers, they were able to feel confident in reading documents. Another place to look here is we've created some quick little social studies standards videos that can give you information here. There is also this ELA, Social Studies, and ELP crosswalk, especially if you teach like a self-contained 6th grade class and you're getting some flack from an administrator or someone that says, oh, you can't teach social studies, you need to teach English. This is where you need to go and show them, oh, no, I'm teaching these ELA Standards. Again, and we've got studies that show that actually it helps with your reading. Here you can sign up for all the professional development that we have sponsored through ADE, which is great. And that leads me to the next part, which is a lot of our professional development is not, it's through partner organizations like Teaching American History or the American Council for Economic do training geared for middle school, elementary, high school, but we don't do them, and we partner with them. So what I've done is I've gone out and created this Wakelet, which you can copy and paste this URL when you get the PDF, or you can use your cell phone and copy this QR code. It will take you out to the Wakelet, which, let me see here. Okay, here we go. So this is what the Wakelet looks like. You click on this fall PD flyer here, and this takes you out to a PD flyer which shows all of the webinars, which we've got today's webinar, but then you've got different trainings here. Like here we've got some big, I just did these just this past week. We've scheduled with Big History Project to do standards for 6th through 8th grade or high school. This would be a great one for you guys to come to. Even if you don't incorporate all of the Big History Project, it's free, and they've got some really, really neat lessons, documents, all sorts of stuff that's scaffolded, also for Lexile level like Newsela does. We have partner trainings here in October, like here's the Arizona Council for the Social Studies, We the Voters. This would be a great 8th grade one to do. We also have ones that are geared for your own personal, like for you to learn more too. Like if you don't know a lot about a particular topic, like here, these documents and debates through Teaching American History. This is where you sign up and you go to these, and it's just for you personally to learn more about Reconstruction, because maybe you just don't learn it all, didn't learn that much, or if you're like me, you took like 2 U.S. history classes. We've got, here's one, Civic Saturday, where you actually will get a $50 gift card to Barnes & Noble for attending on a Saturday. A Holocaust Education Forum for teens. Here's a geonomics one as well. And so these are all what we've got here through the rest of the fall. One thing I did want to point out, and this is in the, if you come out here to the K12 Standards, let's see, how are we doing time? We've got 5 minutes. Oh, not the videos. Here, under the 7th grade resources, if you click this link, this is one especially, this is from, it's through the Ed blog, and it's partnered with UCLA and the the National Council for History Education. And this is how to teach U.S. history in a global context, which it models with the C3 inquiry right here. And it also here, which I think is great, actually has got units set up for you, which is fantastic, about how to teach not a U.S. history course, but essentially what our standards are, which is a global studies course with a kind of a focus on U.S. history. So this is, so again, you get this link from coming right here under 7th grade resources. It's got 6th grade stuff there too. And then I think that's it for the resources. All right, questions and answers. We've got 5 minutes. So any questions that you guys have with regards to the new standards? Definitely don't feel intimidated. You don't have to use a textbook. There is tons of stuff out there. Like I said, these, let me put it back here. Check out these here. In fact, here, let's click on the 6th grade one just so you can see what it looks like here. So here, course considerations. And then if you come here, like here's Asia for educators. If you didn't take a lot of Asian history class or you just don't know that much about it, Geographic Alliance. There's so much that I've had to legitimately just teach myself over the years. Here's the Economic Council for Education. That's a great one. Teachinghistory.org. Here's a Women in History, a World History site, Annenberg. This has got some interesting videos. And so there are all different kinds of sites out here for that to look at. We will be offering, for the fall, we're really sticking with mostly just, hey, here are the standards, here's how you use them. But if you're interested in inquiry and resources, definitely look to some, we'll be doing more webinars in the spring on inquiry and on resources. We've already got, like I said, those uh, trainings in February with the Big History Project, which would be great if you teach 6th or 7th grade. The Civic Saturday coming up would be a great one. We also have the Korean consulate coming over from LA, and they're bringing 2 professors from California to come talk about the Korean conflict and U.S. Korean relations today. So that would be great for 8th grade teachers, or 7th grade teachers would be perfect. That's on November 14th, and we're hosting that here at the Department of Education. So take a look at this little wakelet. It's updated constantly. Like I said, I just put out the big history stuff out there, so take a look at that. And then thank you guys so very much for coming and listening. It was great. I hopefully was able to give you guys some more information about where to go and some resources to use. Again, look for more webinars in the spring, specifically for inquiry and using resources, and we'll get into that more at that point in time. And feel free to contact me, email me wherever, if ever you have any questions or something like that. I feel like my job here is to serve you and to make your guys' life a little bit easier. So please don't hesitate to do that. I will be taking attendance and doing that tomorrow. Once the attendance is taken, then I will be sending out a copy of the PDF of this PowerPoint, so that way you guys will have access to the PowerPoint that you saw today, and you'll have those quick links for that one slide that I gave you too. So thank you guys all again so much for coming. Have a great afternoon. And if you are on fall break, I am jealous. This is my first fall break, not having one. So enjoy your time off and get some much needed rest. And thank you again.